Alright, so we're out in Keith's Motorsports studio. This is like where they film all of their YouTube videos, and today we're making a video with his G80 M3. We're going to take it for a drive, look at some of the modifications that he's done, and then we're going to put it on the lift and take a look underneath it. The exterior of the G80 M3 might be the most polarizing design of any current car. In many ways, it broke the mold for BMW's long-running design language and quite literally introduced a new face for the brand. Although I'm not in love with it, the design grows on me each time I see it. And for better or for worse, if it was BMW's intention to get people talking about their cars, they definitely succeeded. Having driven an F80 and currently owning an F30, I can confidently say that the G80 interior is a big upgrade from its predecessor, especially with these optional carbon bucket seats and the extended leather dash. I have to say, I'm impressed. One thing I don't like though is the full digital gauge cluster. It's not a knock on this particular one, but rather the car industry's departure from analog gauges in general. There's just something about a well-designed analog cluster that can't be replicated with a screen.
So this is our 2022 BMW G80 M3 Competition X Drive, the first time BMW put an all-wheel drive system in an M3, and this car is amazing. It's basically like a baby F90 M5. So as you can see, the car is Isle of Man green, which a lot of people have, but we PPF'd the entire thing in Expel Stealth Wrap. So it's the same OEM color, it's just clear to matte it out, so it kind of looks like our blue car over there. It makes it look cleaner, longer, helps it stand out a little bit, and for video purposes, it takes away a lot of the flaws because it really softens the light and just spreads everything out. Let's walk around the exterior. We'll show you some of the things we did. We'll pop the hood and then we'll finish with the interior. Now, the cool thing about this car, it is so capable from the factory, you really don't have to do a ton to it to actually make it a lot of fun. So the big thing, let's start with the most controversial part of this car, right? The grills. So we put these dry carbon fiber CSL style grills on. What I think is really cool about them, not only do they have this really cool epoxy keys badge, but we have them on the car, as do other people, before the actual CSL came out. So I think that's really cool. We also added these dry carbon air ducts. This is all our carbon on the car. We have an OEM style front lip. We have these little canard things, and at first I didn't really like them and I wasn't gonna put them on, and then I put them on and now I feel like the car looks naked without them. I think it just looks super aggressive, which is really cool. We also did the black line LED lights. When I got the car, I didn't have the option to do laser lights, but I think these look pretty cool. I do actually have a set of laser lights if we ever want to switch them up, but I like these, so it's not that bad. Over here at the wheels, we have the BMW OEM little floating center caps here. So every time you park the car in pictures and in videos, everything is right side up. The fitment was, you know, typical for a standard car. So we put some key spacers and we bumped that out. And as you can see, we have the Toyo R888R tires on here. So this thing, even though it's all-wheel drive, it came with the Pirelli P0s. And if you try to do launch control or whatnot, you will literally just spin all four, which is kind of a wild feeling. You spin through like second or third. So we definitely needed some really good tires to be able to put the power down to the road, which we're going to talk about the power in just a second. So let's continue our walk along the outside here. Behind the wheel, we have our TLG Tommy L Garage mud flaps, a must have. We just had our big car show and you can see which cars don't have them, because right here, especially if you put spacers on, it just gets pelted with rocks. So if you see a car that's all chipped up, that's because they don't have some TLG in their life. On the side here, we have another piece of dry carbon with this little fin here. So it just adds to the carbon package that we have installed on this car. For the mirror caps, we have our dry carbon mirror caps, which are a full replacement. It's not an overlay. And we have these smoked out sequential blinkers that just make it look a little bit cooler. And then with the rear of the car, we have, again, a piece of carbon on the rear. We have, it's an M4 style we have at the moment. We are gonna change that up in a little bit, but we wanted to have something on for the show. And then we have, again, more of our dry carbon package. So we have the side pieces, the diffuser, and then an exhaust that I'm not really supposed to talk about for about a month or so, but we'll just leave it. It has exhaust. You'll find out what it is soon, and it sounds really nice. So from the factory, the car makes about 510 horsepower, and we added a little bit more. Like I said before, this car is extremely capable, so it's very easy to get a lot more power. So let's talk about how we did it and what kind of numbers we're at. So as I said before, we have a catback exhaust. You can see we have a Mishimoto intake. And what you don't see is we do have a boot mode flash tune with a custom map on it. Now we run an E50 fuel, and with that, we're able to get about 200 more horsepower than factory. So right now, the car sits at about 700-ish horsepower, and it runs 10-2 every single time at the track. We are going to turn up the boost a little bit more. Again, this is stock fuel system. Literally, it's an intake, an exhaust, we had to get our DME unlocked, so we did have to send it over to Russia to have them work their computer magic and then send it back, and then Halim did a tune for me. Again, we're on E50, so that's 50% ethanol, 50% 93, and the thing makes crazy power. I've never had a car that could get to this power level for the least amount of mods. I mean, even for the F80, first you gotta do a crank hub, that's a couple $1,000s. And then to get to this, you have to do big turbos and then reliability, and just, it's a whole mess. With this, it is so easy to do it. The other thing under the hood that you'll see, and really the last exterior mod, we do have our custom keys brace. This is our final prototype, so this is going to be in development soon. But yeah, everything fits really good. What's really cool about this, not only is it carbon, and it's also anodized aluminum, we designed every element of this down to the actual nut and everything. The only thing we didn't design were these stainless steel bolts, because it was just cost prohibitive, but we literally designed everything down to the nut. Everything fits great, and you can preload it, so you can actually tighten it up and make sure that you have everything as rigid as possible. So as many of you know, the G series cars look pretty much the same. They have the same interior, they have the same basic body, they use the same taillights, the same trunk, and many other shared parts. So when you look at the G20 and the G80, you know, besides the obvious huge front end of this car and wide body kit, you might think, well, it's pretty much the same car. Why would you get a G80 if you can have a G20? But just like we did last time when Justin came, we put his 340 on the lift and then we put the F80 on the lift. There are a lot of differences. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a look under the G20 M340i, and then we'll show you what it looks like when we put a G80 on the lift. So here is a general shot of the suspension, very standard looking suspension. As far as the brakes are concerned, it has basically a big brake kit in the front, and it has this little pathetic brake in the rear, which is actually very similar to the G80. The suspension components really just look like they came off of an F30. As far as the underbody, you know, BMW is just going to town with plastic these days, and you'll see that there's a little bit of a difference in here on the G20 versus the G80. So here you have, you know, a lot of plastic. There's no coolers or anything like that, and then it just has this stamped metal, which, you know, does the job at protecting some of the vitals of the car. As far as the exhaust configuration is concerned with the B58, it just has one pipe that goes out because it has just a single turbo, and then it goes down, it splits into two, and then it gives you dual tips. As far as the transmission, this is a standard ZF transmission that you'd find in one of these cars. Nothing really too crazy. A lot of the parts just look very basic, like they just got this piece of aluminum, they stamped it, and then they just threw it on the bottom of the car. So they didn't spend too much time refining much back here. And then as far as the rear is concerned, you can see all the control arms and whatnot are just like bent metal, which I guess does the trick. Here's that brake we were talking about. Most of these cars, I believe they're just a one piston. Yeah, it's just a one piston brake, and they're electronically controlled. That's actually what they're doing with your e-brake nowadays. So as far as the braking is concerned, you know, it's not really too special. Spoiler alert, it's not really super special on that. When you look at like the subframes and whatnot, this one is made of steel. The differential just looks like a basic differential. And yeah, I mean, it looks great. It looks very similar to what you'd find under an F30. So now that you have an understanding of what this looks like, let's put the G80 up here and see what kind of differences we can spot. All right, so now we have the G80 up in the air. Let's take a walk. So the first thing you're going to notice is it has an oil cooler. You can start to see that there are some elements in here that show that this is designed around performance. So although I don't agree with this style of oil cooler with no protection from rocks, right here, it is there and it's going to give you that additional cooling. Next, instead of just plastic and then just cheap metal, you have a much nicer looking metal stiffening plate. On the F80, it had it where it was just straight here and it was very easy to take off. The first time I took this off, I realized that there's actually bracing. You have to take all this plastic off because this actually goes down to here to really stiffen it up. Now, typically you won't see a brace that large unless you really need a rigid chassis like in a convertible. But even on the G80, they went the extra lengths to make this thing as rigid as possible. Over here at the suspension, you can see that everything is just much more refined. A lot of the parts look very similar to an F80, and you can see that BMW used more premium materials and just better manufacturing. Even with the dust shield, you notice that they bent it over. It's not just an unfinished edge. So they definitely put the extra time, effort, and attention into the M cars to make them the beasts that they are. With the brake, has a massive brake. It is definitely still a step up above the G20. This, you can see that there's a piston here, here, and also down here. So it is a 6-spot Brembo caliper, and definitely will get this car stopped. One thing I forgot to say is we have AST lowering springs on here, which we never made a video on. But we will have a video on something like that soon. So yeah, it has the adaptive suspension from the factory, which is going to set the dampening to whether you have it in eco mode, sport mode, or comfort mode. One thing you'll notice with the G80 M3 is that it has 2 exhaust pipes because it is a twin turbo inline 6. And something that's really strange, and you see the pipes come out here, and then you have this little crossover pipe that goes over the length of the car. On the F80, they just came straight down. It had unequal length exhaust. Now the problem with that is it kind of made it sound like a lawnmower. So people didn't like that. They didn't like the rasp. So what BMW did is they actually listened and they tried to make it an equal length by adding this extra little pipe. Over here, we have our pan where our transmission fluid is sitting. It's much more exposed. This is basically a ZF transmission on steroids where the F80 had a DCT. Personally, I love the DCT until I drove this, and then I don't like the DCT as much because I thought this could never be as good as it is. The only thing comparable to driving this car, I would say, was a 2017 Audi R8 V10 Plus. The way that this car shifts and all, unbelievable. And then you can see we have the half shafts and also the front axles because it is X-Drive. Not sure if I said it or not, but with the X-Drive, you can actually hit the M button on your steering wheel and you can disable front wheel. So it becomes just a rear wheel drive car, which is pretty cool. We have secret exhaust we're not really supposed to talk about yet, but you can see and you can figure out who it is in like 3 seconds. And then as we go back, again, you can see BMW with the bracing. They have much nicer components. I don't know why they can't just put something like this in the regular G20, but I guess they're just, you know, trying to save cost anywhere they can. And even with that, the cars are still very expensive. And this bracing goes all throughout still. It's not just right here. Let's take a look at the suspension and brakes. So the rear brake, I believe, is the exact same thing. It's just a 1 piston, and that's because they have all of these electronics in it. Now, I did speak with AP Racing about it. They are trying to come up with something better, but they're trying to get around that, where you can still have an e-brake in the car. As far as the suspension is concerned, you can see that it more resembles the style of what's up front. On the G20, it was like bent pieces of steel that didn't really look like anything. Here, you can see that every piece is super refined. Again, we have our AST lowering springs back here. And even, again, the dust shields, they just bend over the edge just to make it more finished and to just have, you know, just really to take it up that extra little notch. On here, we do still have a steel subframe. However, the tube is a lot smaller, and even just the way they weld it together, it's just, they cared 40% more. And then the differential Has these super aggressive fins to make sure it's getting as much airflow and cooling down as much as possible. As you'd expect in the M version of the car, there's quite a bit of difference. It's not exactly the same car. As much as I would love to have said my 335, you know, was pretty much the same car as an F80, there's so much that is actually different. And to take the suspension components and to upgrade them to this, it's quite a bit of money, and most of the time it just doesn't fit up. Yeah, that's pretty much everything as far as the underneath of the car goes. I think the next best thing to do is just to go drive it.
One thing I'll say right away is that this car feels like really solid, like the build quality and everything, even compared to your F80 that we drove last year.
Right.
It just feels like a better built car. I know it's like a newer car, obviously, but it just feels like more well planted and well put together, I think.
I think you can really feel like all those stiffening plates. Like you can feel how stiff overall the car is.
Sorry. Oh yeah. Now one thing that's cool, you said this is an X-Drive car and you have the option to turn off the front wheels completely. Because I remember on the older generations there was like different software like X-Delete, and people wondered like, is it really safe or is it doing like some incremental like wear and tear? But I think BMW showed that, you know, it can be done, and I think it's a really cool implementation because you really do get the best of both worlds.
The thing with this one is with X-Delete, because we used to run it on the 335, it felt like something was like broken. Like it just, something didn't feel right.
Right.
Where this, it feels like a rear wheel drive car when you actually do it. Once you get to a certain power level, rear wheel drive, it just, in my opinion, people are gonna debate me on this. It's not practical. Right. And there's also like a huge safety element.
Yeah.
Where
and this
it's
has
just,
what, 700 horsepower?
Roughly, yeah. So.
All right, let's turn onto this back road and see how it does. Oh my god. Oh my gosh. That is fast. I know I said this in the last video, but doesn't it feel crazier like when you're not the one driving?
Oh yeah. Because you have that you have a lack of control.
Right. Yeah, I think that a lot of enthusiasts would agree that with the F80, it was always kind of in the shadow of the E90 M3 with the V8. I think a lot of people kind of felt left down when the F80 kind of came out, but I really think that this is like BMW's return to glory, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's scary. I can feel it kind of swaying a little bit. I don't want to get too crazy here.
Well, I'll switch with you and then I'll do it.
Yeah.
You ready?
Don't kill us.
I haven't yet. It's not letting me launch it. That wasn't even launch control.
So what are your thoughts of this car compared to the F80 since you own both of them?
I would take this any day.
Really?
I think the F80 is going to be like a really good like classic because it's like the first like twin turbo F-Series because everything was going to turbo. And you can still get it in a manual and it's still rear wheel drive. So like those guys that are die hard, like has to be rear wheel drive, have to be manual. It's still a really good car and they're track weapons. But I think especially, I don't know, I just think that this car is just on another level. And I know a lot of guys, you know, I feel like people just use the front end as an excuse to like, oh, the front end's ugly. And it's like, you know, when the F80 came out, you know, there's a lot of people who didn't like it. Every time a new car comes out, people don't like it. And then they fall in love with it. And then the next generation comes out, they're like, oh, it's ugly. It never looks as good as this one. It's like, you said that one was ugly. So, we'll see. But yeah, I love this car. I think just all around just the rigidity of it, the performance of it, the safety of it. Just, I don't know. I can't find many flaws in this car. Well, we have a video about that actually. There are definitely flaws, but I think this is one of the best cars that BMW's ever made.
If you can get past the looks, the G80 M3 is a solid entry in BMW's M lineage. It has a highly capable engine that seems to hold up well to tuning and represents an excellent value to performance ratio. The optional all-wheel drive system makes this performance car usable 365 days a year. The interior, while not traditionally BMW's strength, feels more refined compared to its predecessor. Huge thank you to Bryan for showing us his M3. Be sure to check out Keys Motorsports YouTube channel to follow this build, as well as keysmotorsports.com for aftermarket BMW performance parts. You're live.
So this is my 2022 BMW X-Drive. Let's try again. In the M cars, they do a significant amount of differences. I didn't really like that. Let's try it again. For video purposes, it takes away a lot of the flaws because it really softens the light and just spreads everything out. Oh. Whoa! You hit a turkey.